Gambles. I'm a senior project manager at the Open University, and I wear other hats too. I'm a trustee for a charity. And I'm here today with Sol Berend, and we'll shortly have Richard James presenting to us. Yeah, I would like to introduce to you the amazing Richard James, who's going to talk to us about practical magic at Nationwide Building Society, and about how he can relate what he's been doing to Harry Potter. So this is going to be a really interesting talk. And I will just mention that the session is being recorded, and if you have a problem with that, then please leave now, I think I have to say, or forever hold your peace.
Yeah.
So I hope that's okay. So I'll hand over without further ado to Richard James. Thank you, Richard.
Cool. So first off, thank you very much for the warm introduction. And before doing anything, I just wanted to say, and I've said this a few times actually, but for this group, thank you. So here we are in the bleak midwinter, and we are stuck in our houses, and I miss seeing folks face to face. I really appreciate people taking the opportunity in mid-December to come and join in after work. I very much appreciate Sooner Safer Happier for putting this on. More broadly, this group, this sort of community is incredibly important for so many of us, both within our organizations individually, and then sort of connected out across the wider community of interest and community of practice. So I'm very pleased to be able to be here and to share this. We don't know whether this is going to work or not. This was prompted because my girls at age 8 and 10 are super big Harry Potter fans, and whether it be because we went to Harry Potter World, or whether it be because I've been reading the books, or whether it be because Jack Hughes was calling out Umbridge as a bad scrum trainer, I suddenly felt like we could have a go at using Harry Potter as allegory for our worlds. So what I'm going to do over the next sort of 30, 40, 45 minutes is to talk through some reflections I've had from our journey here at Nationwide Building Society, using the motif of Harry Potter and the 20-year anniversary of the first films. What I hope to be able to do then is to pique your interest for a few questions at the end. Either feel free to put them in the chat, or I'm hoping again at the end we've got the time and space for questions. I will happily stick around. I am only missing bath time, bedtime. So do please ask me questions. It will mean that I don't get shouted at by my various monkeys at home. So without further ado, let me see if I can navigate some slides. So the way I'm doing this is ostensibly kind of navigating via the storyline. And so here, for most folks, I guess you'd recognize what this is. Here is Harry Potter, and here is Harry Potter receiving an invite. So he's age 10, nearly 11, just about to turn 11, and he lives in a house with the Dursleys. And these envelopes, these invites arrive, and Harry doesn't come from a wizarding family, as he's aware. And the thing I would observe about Harry in the early parts of the books and in the films is that he's excited. He's energized, he's enthused, he is what I would class as one of life's innovators or early adopters. And the nice thing here is the invite makes its way to Harry, and it makes its way to the right person. And it doesn't stop if the invite didn't get to the right person the first time. As you can see from this picture, the invites just keep coming. And I think that, for me, is a really strong parallel to what I would observe in our context back in 2015, 16, 17. We mobilized what we called at that point a digital transformation, and we did use invite over inflict at that point. I never knew of it as invite over inflict. We found what, in my language at that time from Simon Wardley, was more about pioneers, and we sought out pioneers from across the organization to come and join in with this sort of voluntary engagement with this new thing for us. And it was actually, now that I've learned a little more, and thanks particularly to John and the wider team for helping with the language and the things I now know, but this idea of the diffusion of innovation really, for me, comes out of this very first early scene in Harry Potter, where we are looking at them, the early adopters, and how excited they are and how much they want to get engaged, even if they don't know what they're about to get involved in. It's just the newness of it, the novelty. And then equally in this picture, we observe they're probably not early majority or late majority. I think we could safely say that the Dursleys are skeptics, if not potentially even laggards. So up front, the first thing I would observe is invite over inflict has never been truer. It worked for us even at the beginning when we started our digital transformation journey, as was back 5-6 years ago. we still used, and now we are much more resolute about this idea of invite over inflict. How did Harry get to where he got to? Well, he used the power of platforms, didn't he? He probably didn't believe in the power of technical excellence, and he probably hadn't read Simon Rohrer's chapters, and he maybe hadn't yet read Manuel Page and Matthew Skelton, but certainly it was the power of platforms that helped him get where he was going. And those platforms, you have to kind of believe in them. You have to wish them into existence. You have to really care. You have to want to create this magical platform. So for me, very early in the book, again, here's a platform, and the platform ultimately is sort of technology powered, but actually the experience, the journey is much more the storyline, right? So the platform and the technology and the trains, etc., are great, but really what we're talking about here is how that sort of the experience is underpinned by this magic. So it's tenuous, but technical excellence, power of platforms, that's how Harry gets where he goes. Now, when Harry gets to Hogwarts, what do I observe? I observe that Harry pretty quickly understands that books don't bite. Now, here's somebody who's lived in the Muggle world, and he's somebody who's probably only read, maybe he's read some Roald Dahl or something, but he certainly hasn't read any books of magic. And I think it's pretty early doors, actually, he gets attacked by a book, but the books aren't dangerous, really. And Harry, again, as an early adopter, is quite excited by the prospect of reading books. We know that through the course of the film, the library plays quite an important part. So much of what they discover, so much of what they explore, so much of what they ultimately learn comes from these books. And yeah, books don't bite. And it's also, it's true to say that you're not always going to agree with the books, right? So over this last, particularly in lockdown period, I've read broadly, deeply, and I've read deep into technology, and I've read over into psychology and sociology. And hey, the nice thing here is not only do books not bite, but it's okay to disagree. Quite like that. I quite like the fact that actually I will read 2 books and I'll find that some bits of it I agree with. Maybe it's context, maybe it's writing style, but I'm comfortable nowadays that actually we read these things and it's okay to have your own views, your own opinions. And I think, again, what I observed in Nationwide is we've built out our Centre of Enablement, so our Ways of Working team. We've got folks there who are passionate about their bodies of knowledge. But ultimately, what we've got is probably a full stack capability. Joe and I were just talking, we've got almost like an omnist. So in aggregate, a group of folk who share a set of belief in a bodies of knowledge, but are not wedded strictly to one book of knowledge or body of knowledge. So books don't bite. Do read deeply, do engage. I guess, though, the thing I would observe, though, is reading is good, learning is good in that context, but the learning itself is experiential. So here we observe early broomstick practice. I think it's probably Neville. It's almost always Neville. So you need a coach, you need a guide. If you're doing something for the first time, you will feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. And you may well fall off. And in Harry Potter land, you're quite lucky because the medical wing happens to be able to fix broken bones. In our day-to-day lives and our working lives, there's not so often broken bones involved. It's not physical danger. Maybe there's some that sense of embarrassment and trying something new in front of friends and colleagues and losing face. But in the end, we do learn by doing. We can read all the books we want, but if I think about some of John's talks over time about the ski instructor, you don't read a ski manual and then you can ski. It is ostensibly learning by doing and enjoying the exercise of the experiential learning, even if it is tough, even if it makes mistakes. Those mistakes are opportunities for learning. So here, I think pretty swiftly in the Potter films, we get into this idea that learning is a mixture of what you read and what you gain from that reading, but it's the practical side. It's the practicing, it's the learning, it's the experience, and it's the reflection and the go again that is most important. So what I think then, why was Harry learning the broomstick stuff? The game that he particularly loved, he loved Quidditch. And I like this one because for me, here you got the Golden Snitch, and the Golden Snitch, it's a game winner, right? So, there's goals in Hogwarts, there's goals, and there's, you can score a standard goal. There's only one of these things, this elusive Golden Snitch, and it's worth more value than anything else. And so Harry, all the practice Harry does, all this learning, particularly in the context of flying, is in service of velocity and responsiveness, and he's super nimble, and yeah, the tech supports him, so he's got a good broomstick, he's got a better broomstick than some of the others, and yeah, that's definitely important, but as is his bravery, as is his inquisitiveness, and as is his kind of tenacity to search for not just speed but velocity, so speed and direction, plus seeking out the value. And the golden snitch, I like that because it's something a little different. You know, from my perspective, we are no longer talking about just going faster for the sake of going faster and churning out more stuff. We are seeking the item of highest value. And sometimes that will mean that actually you let go goals. You're prepared to forego the next score because you've seen this, the thing of highest value, chase it. I guess also in Harry's learning and the wider group's learning, what do we see? We see this sense of becoming forever curious, this idea that experimentation is ultimately at the heart of, you know, clearly it's at the heart of witches and wizards, but experimentation and scientific method, that sense of hypotheses, measures, leading indicators, and again the balance of confidence and curiosity, the ability to explore at the edges of things that you know, and to be comfortable, either sort of probe, sense, respond, or test, learn, adapt. I think this has been fundamental for us. So as we shifted over the period from, you know, early what we class as digital transformation to more now almost Kaizen continuous improvement, probably the single biggest thing we are trying to work on is that combination of learning and learning by doing, and then enduring focus on experimentation. So putting continuous improvement and improvement of daily work into the work, and reasonably hypotheses, measures, and confidence to continue experimenting, even if the result is not the result you expected. Experimentation sits right at the heart of this more complex space we exist in at the moment. All of that though, watch out for being a know-it-all, and I'm super guilty, right? So I am, and my friends and colleagues on the call, Hermione is brilliant. She's an amazing character, and she saves the day n times over in the movies, the books. But the risk of being a know-it-all, and the risk of kind of alienating folk again with language, or killing the vibe. And the sort of, you know, if folk are just getting to the edges of exploring something new, and yeah, you're saying it wrong or you're doing it wrong, come on, yeah, it's not cool. And I think Hermione, to her great credit, is aware of it, and picks herself up on it at points. And she also has very good friends with a good degree of trust and respect between them, and they can make it work. But just be mindful, you know, for all of this new stuff that you are prepared to go and explore as an early adopter, or maybe even an early majority. Try and keep the invite over inflict, and try and make sure not to kind of be a bit know-it-all, because it does just kill other people's desire to engage, and we observe that time after time. The importance of making it safe, making it acceptable to engage on folks' terms, meet people where they are. What I guess then I would observe though is this idea of curse of knowledge. And I think it starts to become apparent relatively swiftly that once you've started down this path, you can't easily go back. And I think also the thing I observe is that it gets harder and harder to translate back, to exist in two different worlds. And it's wrong to call it the Muggle world and the magic world, but you know, for the sake of a motif, who's to say that Vernon here is wrong, right? So Vernon, for him, there's no such thing as magic. He's not just a skeptic. He's super laggard. He is adamant that there's no such thing as magic. That's a deeply entrenched worldview. And do you know what? Through the course of the narrative arc of like 7 or 8 books, I don't observe Vernon ever fearing for his life, really. I don't observe Vernon breaking bones, really. What I observe is that Vernon, for as much as he doesn't believe in magic, has quite a safe existence. He doesn't have it too bad. So I don't think it's necessarily true to say that, you know, one way around is better or worse than the other. What I would say is that once you've started down a path, it's really hard to go back. And from my perspective, being again comfortable that there are folk who just aren't going to be willing to come with you on a particular journey, and learning how to deal with that, how to work with the early adopters, how to use the diffusion of innovation to not stress too much about those who are not yet willing to engage. I think there are more skeptics than there are laggards. And I think what we observe really is that skeptics can be tempted to talk so long as you come at them with social proof and data and evidence. Treating them as dismissively as muggles probably isn't the right way to do it, right? So we observe that not working out very well through the course of the film. My suggestion is that being respectful for others' perspectives, meeting them where they are, and if we do have skeptics, using their healthy skepticism as opportunities to improve is far better than the name calling and the ultimate alienation that you see. I think pretty early, again in the films, we observe Harry listing the mirror of Erised, or desire. And so I think what we observe here is that this mirror allows for individuals to see the thing that they desire most. And that's good. It's good to know what you desire most. But I think in this context, the thing that becomes important from where we would see it is that actually the sense of what's the shared goal? What's the thing, not the inflicted goal, not the thing where you say, I want to get here and you're going to come with me, but rather what's the shared goal? What's the mission? And more recently, in our nationwide context, we're just completing an exercise called My Mission. And it's this sense of what is it? What's your intrinsic motivation? What really brings you joy? And hopefully what brings you joy lines up pretty well with the purpose, the vision, the goals, the mission of the organization you work with. And I think here, it's funny how divisive actually individuals' goals can be if they're not well aligned with the organizations, or if they are predominantly for growth and power rather than for service and ultimate improvement of the wider organization. So it is important to recognize what you desire, and it's also important to recognize that some of those goals should be shared, not inflicted, but should be shared and should be something that inspires and motivates folk to go through extraordinary acts with resilience, with belief. I think the mission, the purpose, ultimately, you can't do very much without it, and you need to find a way that you can share it, not so that it's just yours, so that others will believe it. The Simon Sinek stuff about how do you make your why others' why. I guess this one I reflect on quite a lot, this idea that there is some sort of transformational potion, or maybe there's a framework that you can install. We know this. We know that there isn't, something that you can either Thanos snap in the Avengers or drink a polyjuice potion. Even in this, the quote on the bottle, right? So allows a drinker to temporarily assume the form of another person. I think when we read things like Sooner Safe Happy, and we talk about the idea of new labels, same behaviors, I think we definitely observe some of this where we see, right, okay, if only but I had this role type, or if only but I had this organizational structure, or if only but I implemented this framework as methodology and smashed it in, then we would be transformed. And for all of us involved, as far as I can observe it, even if it looks for a few minutes that you have the veneer of the transformed thing, it doesn't stick. It's not sustainable. You haven't actually changed behaviors. You haven't changed mindset. You've put a veneer on top of it. And I like the polyjuice thing because I think it allows for some degree of subterfuge, but it's not sustained evolution. It's not change. It's frippery and fakery. So when we're then walking around in these worlds and we're saying, okay, so we don't have polyjuice potion, we can't change the entire organization. What we have tended to find over time is this idea that we end up with worlds colliding. And you see it in the movies, later on in the movies, the wizarding governance world, the sort of Ministry of Magic, ends up having to spend some time with the UK government Prime Minister. And the two, it's a really nice bit of the books. I don't know if it made it into the films, but in the books, it's a really nice sort of description of the other cabinet. And so the wizarding world pops up into the Prime Minister's office, and they just talk at totally cross purposes. They don't have any shared language. They don't have shared experience. Their ways of governing are different. Their ways of controls are different. I'd like to think that, again, the idea here where you can meet folks where they are, and you can attempt to improve rather than impose. And I observe this here at Nationwide. We've got some really good work that I see folks like Tony Kank, like Joel, helping us to adapt the way we do our governance and controls to better reflect a balance between agility and traditional approaches, in a way that's non-confrontational, in a way that invites participation, and allows us to navigate this worlds collide thing. And I think, being okay with that, being okay with the fact that it's awkward when you get the wizarding world and the muggle world together. It's not necessarily always fun. Neither is right or wrong, but it suits context. So the Prime Minister's governing of the UK, and Ministry of Magic's governance of magic is absolutely right for their respective worlds. But here, bringing them together is important, because you want to end up in something that works for all parties, rather than ends up imposing dominion of one over the other, because they'll both be the less for it. We know this, the kiss of death. What could I observe? I could observe that if you want anything to flourish, there needs to be enough bravery to explore. There needs to be enough sense that actually it's okay to try something new. All the way out to the Amy Edmondson definitions around, be able to do something without fear of interpersonal risk. So whether it be at the teams level, whether it be how teams and multi-team systems engage with the organization's governance, whether it be how middle and senior management observe this sort of evolutionary bubbling up of emergent thinking versus deterministic thinking, it's all trust, it's all safety. And in the end, Dementors here is the kiss of death in Harry Potter world. I think here, fear, same thing. It's the kiss of death for improving agility, and being comfortable to work on psychological safety, to be able to explore it. We have been doing some good work based on Amy Edmondson's thinking around trying to dial up psychological safety through measurable sort of instruments and engagements. And what we do observe is that as you start to put a focus on psychological safety, there's almost a sort of relaxing within the organization that allows for more inclusive conversation, that allows for diverse perspectives to be welcomed into a conversation. It's sort of keeping that focus on psychological safety, because if you want to explore something in the complex or uncertain worlds, we know that fear is the kiss of death. And I guess, without getting too sinister, this guy, so he's the main baddie, right? So we don't mention his name in the books. And yet actually, you know what, the sort of, it's okay to say we have these behaviors and they've served us well, but we want to move away from and towards, and we're going to name it, and we're going to celebrate those examples of good behavior that direction aligns with where we're going. And actually, we're not going to castigate for censure and sort of rotten fruit throwing, but we are going to be prepared increasingly to say, if we want to demonstrate these behaviors more and these behaviors less, move away from and towards, we will have to name it. And I think that getting to the stage where actually it's okay to name things and say, right, well, actually, do you know what, like in this instance, let's say command and control is not the way we want to see teams managed. We want to see more self-organization, less managed. These things, just if you don't explore it openly, and again with an inclusive dialogue that says, actually, let's debate this. If you don't name it and talk about it, it comes back to that previous slide. It engenders a lack of psychological safety, and ultimately doesn't drive out fear, and ends up not being able to explore brave new territories, because the curiosity and the courage just aren't in the right place. So for me, being really open on the behavioral shifts that are going to be required to move the organization towards increased agility, and then being prepared to have the harder conversations about what that means for individuals and management styles, potentially even roles within an organization. We certainly observe that in our context. With all that said, taking a slightly darker turn, I think that good humor, by which in all its guises, right? So good humor in the sense of remaining positive, good humor in the sense of feeling brave enough to laugh at yourself, to try new things, to be self-deprecating, to be humble. I think humor is incredibly powerful because it keeps the spirits in the right place. So we would say in our organization, for our Ways of Working team, we tend to now start our get-togethers with a joke, and it's it may seem a bit naff, but just the quite deliberate focus on supporting a background level of good humor and ability to poke fun at oneself and the situation really helps with personal resilience, really helps ultimately in kind of besting things that could look like they're insurmountable. I think humor actually is a more powerful potion than almost anything else I've observed. I don't want to get into too much about whether we think J.K. Rowling had appropriate views or not. What I observe is, as we get later and later in the films, she ends up with quite a multidisciplinary team, let's say. They're made up of muggles, so those people who are not from wizarding families, and they're made up of people who are from wizarding families, and they're made up of folk who've got particular worldviews, and they're made up of folk from different houses, made up of folk from different backgrounds, ostensibly. And what you observe is that actually, in order to succeed, the inclusive environment that this team are able to bring together, and the community that they're then able to engage, is what allows them to succeed in spite of the odds. And I think that, again, the sort of allegory piece, I love the fact that it's not the bravest or the strongest. It's not the A players necessarily. It's the collection that form together, who are prepared to go through the hard yards of making the teams and working at the edges and exploring. It's those folk who are prepared to use good humor, who are prepared to support each other in the tough times and to laugh with and at each other in the tough times as well. It's a team sport. And in our context, what we have done now is to say our Ways of Working Enablement specialists, or agility guides, as Alan Kelly would call them, are out working across the organization in enablement teams. And those enablement teams then form a network. And each enablement team then is itself cross-functional, is working in its local context to improve agility in all its guises, and uses the network, uses the community, uses this sense of it being a team sport, but at a teams level and a multi-team level. It does take all sorts to succeed. And whether they come from the compliance part of your organization, the risk part of your organization, the legal part of your organization, the engineering part, embracing everyone's differences, creating an environment in which teams can emerge, and then really putting the focus onto helping those teams survive, thrive, and ultimately excel. It is a sport for inclusive environments and diverse perspectives. A couple of final reflections then. What was it that sat behind the phenomenon of Harry Potter, particularly the movies? What I would say is that the books were great. I enjoyed the books. I read the books before the movies because my sister is about 7 years younger than me, and I was reading the books as she was reading the books. I never really watched the movies until more recently. I went along to the film studio, and this kind of really appreciating at a sort of meta level. Why do you enjoy the experience of those Harry Potter films so much? Actually, a little bit of it is because of the sort of craftsmanship, the care, the if we think autonomy, mastery, purpose, the mastery of all those individuals who go into making these films excellent. It's the magic behind the magic. So it's not the technology itself that wowed me. It's that technology enabled an incredible experience for those who are watching the films, or for those for whom this brought to life what were already some excellent books. But the movies how they blended then craftsmanship, technology and innovation, and created an experience that was magical. I would suggest here it's a great example of how technology is the support act that actually helps make the experience. Technology is not the goal itself, but we can help create beautiful experiences through leveraging technology in service of creating something that our customers enjoy, and that is where the magic is. And I think that probably then, from a slides perspective, yeah, that gets us to the end of the slides. So a whistle-stop tour of why I feel Harry Potter is a reasonable allegory for the work we do. And yeah, I had a set of slides that were also slightly darker and start dealing with things like, yeah, at certain points in the movies, we observe Ministry of Magic inflicting certain approaches on folk. We observe pain. We observe actually some bad behaviors in both the Muggle world and in the Wizarding world. And it's not that there is good and evil. It's that actually in their respective worlds that there are folk who under fear and stress exhibit certain tendencies. And I shied away from that on a sort of mid-December. I've kept it light and more positive, but I think we see this in so many books and movies. We see this sort of underpinning of the narrative we are living in. And just every now and again, it's quite nice to sort of pause, reflect, and take a look at the things we're looking at, and see yourself in them. So I'm not saying I see myself in Dobby, although we've got the same hairline. That for me though is the end of the slideware, and at this point I will hand back to the group for any questions and reflections.
Wow. Shall I just make a comment while everybody's
Yeah, sorry, Anne.
Maybe. Thank you, Richard. That was absolutely fantastic.
It's a bit odd.
No, it was just, you've covered, there are so many things in there to think about, and just how amazing that you've related that to Harry Potter. And I think you've, well, for me, I'll just talk from my perspective, you've given me a real insight to where you're at yourself, and within your team, and within Nationwide, I guess, in terms of ways of working. Yeah, just amazing. And yeah, I could also say I'm a librarian, so I really liked how you talked about books and how they don't bite, and the library being a place to discover things. And it's a real role of the library actually to provide a wide range of information and to include material content that is perhaps controversial, so that people can draw on that wide range of views and encourage people to read widely around their areas, and form their views and have conversations with others and all of that. Anyway, yeah, just fabulous. Thank you. I will stop talking because I'm sure people will have lots of questions.
I just that particular bit, just before over to questions, I love in particular in Harry Potter this idea that the library plays a really important part. This idea that for us, book clubs and being able to share reflections on books, you're celebrating the love of learning, the love of engaging with a good book, I think is a huge part of kind of the social part. It's odd, right? So the individual act of reading, important, the social aspect of sharing reflections on books, and the importance of things like book clubs to establishing community. But then in the Harry Potter world, it's this idea that it's experiential learning as well, whether it be potions, whether it be transfiguration, whether it be Quidditch, whether it be, I love this in the schooling environment, and it doesn't have to be a wizarding school, but the wizarding school makes it more exciting. Learning and experience, particularly experiencing by doing things that we are uncomfortable with, and that some people will have a natural affinity for, and some people really have to work quite hard at it. And again, team behaviors, the sociology of it, being okay that somebody might have been awesome at that way of working, and actually, do you know what, they're really struggling with this. I think they could have read the book just as well, but when it came to the experiential side, actually, it wasn't so natural for them, or vice versa. Maybe they're not a reader, but they enjoyed the experience of it. So the school piece, I think, works well. I know Tom's got a hand up.
Hey, thanks, Richard. I've got the book up
here.
So
nice.
I thought it sits up there as passive kind of radiation of good practice. Yeah, I really liked the slide you put up about the meeting of the two worlds. That's been an issue that I've faced on a couple of occasions with a couple of different organizations, where new approaches to managing projects, managing progress are constantly met with, requests for timescales and requests for 18-month predictions of outcomes and all that sort of stuff. So my approach has been to use kinefin to try and persuade people of why the work that we're doing can't necessarily be managed in that way. But I'm just thinking, from an organization that's been through that process, have you got any tales you can tell about the real world stories of overcoming those hurdles?
So I would, if he's up for it, TC, Tony, do you fancy giving a bit of a perspective on where we are, how we're dealing with this? I note the comments, but Tony, if you're able to pop off mute, is it possible?
I'm here.
Hello,
here.
mate.
Just give me the question very quickly again. Sorry, you caught me on the hop.
So for Tom was talking about ostensibly the meeting of two worlds. So it's particularly in this in the governance. So when we have the traditional world meets the new world, again, these are unfair words we use, but when those two worlds collide, what are techniques that we are using and we are learning from in our context? Would you mind just giving a riff on that for a couple of minutes?
Sure. You mentioned trust a lot in your presentation. That's key. In the little chat comment I just made, it was also about the respect. So those governance processes have owners. People get up out of bed every day only to run those governance processes. And there's people with lives of doing the cut and pasting in the cottage industry of PowerPoints, and that's their working life. So having respect for those people and the process they run and their colleague experience as doing that. And then when you empathize with what they're trying to achieve as a broad principle, all they're trying to achieve is transparency. They're not really most of them aren't trying to exert control. There might be the odd, fake control, but most of them are just trying to achieve transparency and enable decision-making where it's required. So if we empathize enough and find that, we might be able to get into relationships with those that then can influence those processes. But if we go in all guns blazing with your process stinks, don't expect a good response. The thing that's been a tiebreaker, I think, for us has been to do the research and emphasize the delivery team's experience as a user experience and analyze the user experience. And then you can say, well, it's not me saying your process is rubbish. It's your customers out there, the delivery teams that supposedly you're trying to help. It's them saying that their experience is bad. And that's been a better approach to get those conversations started. And ultimately, we've had that reciprocated with that approach. We've had that reciprocated, haven't we, now, with those functions all responding, setting up working groups, mobilizing, doing stuff to come out of denial that there's an issue and actually start head on into them. So I think that's the key. That's been the story anyway.
The move from Tony there, that colleague experience and the shift to colleague as customer of the system of work, and being able to expose that, and ultimately, exactly to Tony's point, people didn't turn up to try and make other people's lives shitty. They're trying to do a good job. And I think what Tony's work has done in particular at Nationwide is just to make that conversation viable. And it's not to try and turn it 180 degrees and say that colleagues must have it all their own way. There's a really nice, you think about the Nieberg stuff around alignment and autonomy. So Tony does an excellent job in helping with that transparency and how do we increase alignment to enable increased autonomy, and whether it be Dan North or Nieberg. I think that, Tony, you're excelling in that gap between helping teams to enable the governance processes to support their ways of working rather than for it to feel like a challenge.
Yeah, I think there's one little tiny hack in there, which is one of the patterns in the book, if we want to call it out, the headless chicken pattern I've referred to a lot. So acknowledging that there are such a thing as agile cowboys diffuses the opinion that everyone's an agile cowboy, that agile, but acknowledging there's a difference between agile teams with self-discipline and those without. That's key. And so then you're saying, actually, there's still a place for some sign of governance of the health of the system. Are the teams as good as they think they are? And can we have the transparency around all of that to enable improvement? So that's important too. You can't just say everything waterfall is rubbish and everything agile is great, because they'll point at all the agile failures. So you've got to be real.
All right, there we go. Tom, does that help?
Yeah, as a recovering agile cowboy, I recognize all of those things. Certainly had to very much work on my own discipline and as an agilist, and focus more on the people. That's been a big change. And the book and tonight's been really helpful to kind of clarify a lot of those thoughts as well. Thank you very much.
I would, Tom. The one thing I would say, so I'm about as cowboy-esque as you're going to get as well. And actually, do you know what? The period where we were running digital transformation, and we had in that context, let's say it's a Willy Wonka golden ticket, and so you were able to do things that the rest of the organization couldn't. And do you know what? Actually, over time, that digital can do things the rest of the organization can't, became more and more problematic, because one group of people have these additional rights and access and kit, and the alienation that caused, the friction, wasn't super positive. And so I think that reparation period and respecting that it's not cowboys you sort of trying to take over the place, serving the time to do exactly as Tony's just said, that to be clear that there are good and bad projects and there are good and bad agile work, and all can be improved, I think has been super helpful, because otherwise it does feel a bit us and themy. Zach.
Thank you, Richard. What a fantastic talk. Taking the Harry Potter stuff, I come from a Disney perspective. So you've got three themes going on in a Disney movie where the pre-teens get it, the teens see it as a rite of passage that's coming, and the adults are looking with whimsical nostalgia.
Yeah.
But everybody can see it together. And when you take the movie metaphor that we've got, movie is the highest of the art forms at the moment, going from architecture, landscaping, poetry and prose, painting and sculpture, music. That was Schopenhauer. You bring in the digital enablers from the turn of the last century. You've got dancing, because you can get it all the time, movies, and I think we're going to go to games next.
Yeah.
So I see games coming up and movies being a way of doing it. And if you take a movie making metaphor and apply it into the digital domain, what you can do is separate the screenplay, which is the screens, and look at technology as supplying the soundtrack and the FX.
Nice.
Which means that you can map out an emotional user journey. So you were talking about government. I'm working on something for them at the moment. We've got a little emotional up and down journey. And when you look at the Harry Potter movies, they're really the man in the hole story. So if you have a look for Kurt Vonnegut on YouTube, he did a master's and he's got a great thing on the shape of stories. Yep. And in there, you'll find the which way is up, man in a hole, the Kafka-esque continual down, the Cinderella one. It's really funny. What you get with the people who are early adopters, they'll come in and they'll go for that dark night of the soul moment. They're finding something in themselves that they're getting. Whereas the other people who are a bit more antagonistic in the story, they're going to sit back and watch to see what happens. So when we get round it, instead of looking at user stories, we bring the agile concept inside the business and we create lean scenes. So it's a business story that has the person and the team, operations, and strategy. And with that, you can then split out where the governance comes. So when you're doing governance on creatives, the way that Pixar and now Disney, who own Pixar, now work is they have the brains trust, which is different from the suits who are interested in the money and the marketing. So I think that what you're doing is taking a step to the right. For most people who can't go from pure agile and thinking in business terms, there's a bit in the middle, which is the design schools. You know, if Bauhaus did bureaucracy, it'd be bloody minimal, wouldn't it?
Nice, nice.
So I think that what you're doing is setting out a marker that other people are going to follow. Fantastic, thank you.
Very good. I've learned, and thank you. I've got that. I'm on my way with Kurt. It was a difficult surname, but it also made a difference from being on the NHS third booster website, where I'm still 10,000th in the queue. So this is a nice search on my search engine. Thank you. Okay. Appreciate it, Zach.
Vonnegut, Slaughterhouse 5, he wrote.
Got it. Thank you. Anne, hand up.
Yeah, just picking up on that, it's making me think. I've been following the metaverse story. I don't know if anybody else has been kind of looking at that. And yeah, Zach's comment there about thinking that gaming is perhaps the next place. Well, I think it was last week that Mark Zuckerberg announced the launch of a Pac-Man community audience played game within Facebook Meta. And yeah, so I think there are probably some very good reasons why they've chosen Pac-Man. So it's quite retro, it plays to the older audience. But earlier this year, the people who produced Pac-Man produced a Pac-Man Battle Royale, which obviously is going to is appealing to the younger generation out there.
That is quite a mashup.
It is. And I'm not sure whether that's in metaverse yet, but it, you know, it's there. And it just made me think, you know, why have they chosen this game? You know, ease of adoption, as well as that appealing to different generations, flexibility of the platform to include multiple players and roles, continuously adapt to the new digital technology and increasingly virtual world we're in, so on. But also, you know, Simon Wardley talks about situational awareness, doesn't he? And if we think about Pac-Man, the kind of platform that Pac-Man is, and Simon Wardley talked about it being possible to create consistent success in complex environments. And he says the business is nothing more than a game. It's a game which has maps. It's a game which has repeatable patterns. Well, Pac-Man is a game that has maps, which has repeatable patterns, which has people willing to explore uncharted worlds, perhaps populated by others who are exploring, maybe even creating new areas, products, knowledge, connections, and maps. People who are learning through gameplay what works and what doesn't work, and perhaps starting to anticipate and help evolve change and to see where and why to act in the space. Those are my thoughts on that.
It's got deep between Zach and yourself there. One thing I would observe on just this general gamification more broadly, like at its when we talk experiential learning, and then we talk just the enjoyment of slight competition, not too threatening competition. Jolt, who I guess is still hanging around somewhere on the Zoom audience, Jolt is doing some excellent work with us at Nationwide on that sense of kind of gamification. We in the physical world, we used to do things like the DevOps simulator. So when we were doing things like the Phoenix project and G2, G3 ran a nice simulator. I think the world we live in now, the ability to have increasing levels of experiential fun learning. I'm really excited by where the next 2 or 3 years goes with that, because I just think there's so much opportunity for accelerating personal and team development with an experiential game environment.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's mentioned in Team of Teams to an extent. Gamification is mentioned in Turn the Ship Around, and yeah, people do use gamification in various sort of ways in terms of, you know, training and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so if you watch teenage boys playing PS2, the teamwork that they have is phenomenal. And now I'm seeing them going to university to learn how to make games. And when they hit industry in the next 2 to 3 years, we old guys are going, what do you need a coach for? We know what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a teenage boy who does that. I see him, and I don't know that he'll necessarily go on to make games. He probably won't, but I think he's learning so many skills through that gameplay, and it will be really interesting to see him in a business environment, in any business environment.
I think the fact Amy Edmonton and the learn what as a technical skill and the learn how as a social skill. And I'm not necessarily saying that Call of Duty is necessarily always good social skills, but certainly teamwork and that idea that this next generation kind of come through with almost like human API, that they feel very able to connect and form teams really easily and aren't so naturally hierarchically siloed. yeah, I feel that we'll get to a generation where there's much more desire to integrate around goals, gameplay goals, rather than I work for this person, I work for this person, I work for this person, and I do exactly what I say in my life. It just feels like that's quite a natural evolution that's emerging around us, and as the generation then comes into the workplace, I do think it will be a forgive the pun, game changer.
Yeah, going from solo to silo with startups and SMEs, and
Nice.
that's done.
Very good. Any other questions or reflections? So Mark Price has just pointed out that we did have a Pac-Man style game in Nationwide. So when we were trying to help unlock a bit more engagement with Nationwide's ways of working.
Have you seen the Google version where you can control it with your eyes?
No.
So Google AI have got Pac-Man, and you switch your camera on and you just show where you want it to go.
Nice. All right.
And it's all in the browser.
That tech being indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my mortgage with the Nationwide to go the same way. I'm just trying to push it around.
I can't help you with that, unfortunately. We didn't do it, but again, I was thinking about the extent to which technology doesn't really underpin the Harry Potter movies so much. The magic that is there in how the movies were brought to the screen is there, but in the books itself, it's an interesting period, because it was written in the late 90s and through the 2000s, but they didn't reference the technology that was available at that time. So we don't see machine learning and artificial intelligence. We don't see the internet play a role. And I like the way Harry Potter's then it's got this lovely touch towards the technology, and sort of muggles growing technology and wizards living in wizarding. And one of the Weasleys, the dad Weasley, is super interested in muggle technology. I just wonder, in like 5-10 years, whether, if the books have been written then, whether the sort of prevalence of some of these technologies and social technologies, I don't know whether Potter in the wizarding world, I'd love to think it would survive in this modern age, but the way Rowling wrote it, I think she ducked the need for a deeper conversation about technology, rather technology as a sort of quaint part of the story rather than anything threatening or difficult. I just think that I was interested in whether that would be different in the future.
Well, I refer back to the Bauhaus, because they set up in 1919, and at that time you had the Spanish flu, like COVID. We don't have the war that they did, so they were recovering from that. And the other thing that they had, which is similar to what we have today, is they were afraid of mass production coming through, where we have automation. And what they found was there was a kind of spirituality that came out through the stuff before it got closed down. But they produced many great teachers and people that went on to affect the stuff that we do. Albers with his graphic design comes through. Kandinsky. Some of the buildings that we work in are essentially Bauhaus buildings.
Yeah.
The Apple building took their design of the stairwell, where people were encouraged to meet in the Bauhaus building, bump into each other, and comes through. So I think that as we see automation coming, we shouldn't get too overdriven by the technology, but to see the benefits that we can have by using our artistry to work on it and make everybody's lot a better one.
Yeah. Just sort of jumping back on the sort of the cloud transformation or the digital transformation, ostensibly taking modern technologies, the modern technologies without the consideration for artistry and sociology and how teams are formed, and ultimately into the sort of socio-technical design of teams using these modern technologies. I find we do get sometimes stuck on this idea that just having a new technology is the thing that is the deal maker. That will make us successful, is having this new technology. I still think in the end it's the sort of human creativity and the ability to engage with these new paints on a paint palette or new artistic mediums that are important, rather than tech itself is not inherently more exciting. How we can use these things in service of greater experiences for customers is the game, I would suggest.
Yeah, and I think we're making that space more available, because I'm probably about 20 years older than most people in the call. And when I was coming into business, there were a lot of ex-military people, and the way that the military mindset was in through business, respect the person, not the position. Whereas now you don't have that stuff that's come through schools, and people are freer to be able to speak and say what they want. So you get my peers who are a bit going, you can't say that to me, I'm older than you. Hang on a minute, mate, it's the world, you know, let's get on with it. If you got the skill, do it.
So Anne, here we are coming up to 6:30. Are there other things we want to touch on? I am more than happy to stick around and talk. Joel, please feel free to ask questions in the chat.
Yeah, anybody, any more questions, please? Any in the context of the journey at Nationwide?
And like, if
I have a question, Richard.
What?
Can I have a question?
Yeah.
So my question, my question around, you mentioned diffusion of innovation. So where would you put in terms of awareness or in terms of modern ways of working at Nationwide in the diffusion of innovation?
Dude, we did this exercise recently, right? So I think, so for everyone, the diffusion of innovation curve is either, you either see it as the normal distribution curve, or you see it as this sort of S curve. It's the same thing. It's just whether you map it out across the population in something that looks like an S, or whether you map it as a bell curve. What we would observe is then we do have innovators and early adopters, 2.5%, 5%, and we get towards early majority, which get you towards maybe 15%, I guess, maybe 15, 16, 17%. And then your sort of early majority to late majority gets you all the way through the bulk of the bell curve. So if we drew it in the normal distribution, you'd see the late majority then get you through the hump. And Geoffrey Moore would then talk about you crossing the chasm. Crossing the chasm period is that sort of, are you going to find an innovation, whether that be an innovation called ways of working or system of work modification or management innovation? Will we see system of work or ways of working cross the chasm? And what I would observe, we did this exercise as our team, and we probably saw a relatively even spread in quite a narrow band between, let's say, 10 to 20%. So I think that puts us squarely still in early majority. We are not yet in late majority. I think awareness is growing in late majority. And I think some of the moves that Nationwide have made, sort of structural moves are then preceding the dynamics. So if we think about that sort of Gene Kim and Stuart Spear stuff around structure and dynamics, and you say, okay, so we've done some structural changes that might tend towards improved dynamics for agility. But I think you've then got to almost pay back on the structure change. The structure change almost causes more instability and fear for a period. So what I would observe is that we've now made some structural changes with the launch of end-to-end value streams nested within missions, which itself then lends itself quite nicely towards your sort of intrinsic motivation, and you then do have customer-centric sort of, or member, in our word, member-centric alignment towards value stream work. But I think it will take us another 6, 12 months before we start seeing early majority towards late majority. Some of the stuff we can put some support and acceleration behind. So again, the work that Tony Kank is leading on in our context to help support the teams, and also to work on some of the enabling constraints. So can the financial processes and the governance processes actually end up being enabling constraints for improving agility? I think we might see us move from that sort of early majority, but late majority is still over the chasm. I think we might see it 2022, I think will be our year for that, by virtue of the structure changes being broadly done, the dynamics changes coming through with the communities of practice and this type of conversation, and then some enabling constraint work around things like voice of customer, around things like funding. So I'd really like to hope that if we have this conversation in 12 months' time, we'll be seeing us actually comfortably into late majority conversations. For anyone else at Nationwide, you can feel free to disagree with me violently on that or agree, but I think that probably gives a reasonable sort of, we're probably early majority, but looking ahead to late majority, on the near horizon. Others' perspectives? Nationwide team broadly taking that point of view, I think that's reasonable. Any other questions or thoughts? Very good. You know where I am if anyone ever does want to talk, or either just talk about love of Harry Potter or other things. I'm mainly to be found in my room. Do reach out on LinkedIn or Twitter or email. It is, again, a real pleasure to be able to share some ideas with you. This meetup group is important, and thank you for everyone for participating. Thank you to Zach, thank you to Anne, thank you to Tom, to Tony. It is lovely to see everyone. For those I do not talk to, have a great Christmas, and I will see more of you in the coming year. Thank you all. Take care.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Richard.
Richard.
No worries.
And thank you to everyone for attending and for the conversation and the questions and all of that. You'll notice I put a link in the chat to a Mentipoll. It's just one question. If you've got a little bit of time to give us a bit of feedback, that will be greatly appreciated. And I'll just leave you with our next session, which is, I believe, going to be Giles Turnbull, who's the author of the Agile Comms Handbook, talking to us about using the human voice on the 11th of January next year. And I think that all that's left to say is to wish you a very happy and peaceful festive period, and we'll look forward to meeting up with you in January.
Thanks all. Cheers. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks, everyone.